Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. Tonight we start with proof against China, or should I say more proof. The story of how a Chinese scientist deleted early samples of Wuhan patients from an American database. Why were these samples deleted? What did they contain? Why has China gone out of its way to ensure all research and data is either destroyed or hidden? They say hiding the truth is the same as telling a lie, and China has been doing both. Lying about the origin of the virus for the past 18 months and blocking access to any potential evidence. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you what an American scientist has found, how China tried to erase more than 200 samples, but the scientist has retrieved some of that data. Also, how much America is prepared to do to counter China on this. The Pentagon has testified. New sanctions have been imposed on China. We'll bring you all the details. Also on the show tonight, a new report says the Taliban has confirmed talks with India. Which Taliban is this? What did they say about Pakistan and India? We'll bring you a report. Did Russia fire warning shots to drive away a British warship in the Crimean waters? Why is London playing down this incident? Details coming up on that. In Japan, the top court says married couples must use the same surname. The decision has been met with protest, and we say the protesters have a point. And at 39, Britney Spears wants to be in control of her life. She says she wants her life back. Will the court free her from her father's conservatorship? We begin as always.
Holds an all-party meeting on Jammu and Kashmir at his residence in New Delhi. The Prime Minister assures on restoration of statehood along with holding elections in due course of time. India is likely to have a vaccine against COVID-19 by September or October this year, says the director of a top medical institution in the country. Data from phase 2 or 3 trials of India's indigenous vaccine Covaxin is expected later this year. German Chancellor Angela Merkel sounds an alarm about the highly contagious Delta variant leading to a surge in cases across Europe. Her warning comes as Russia records its highest number of COVID-related deaths in a single day due to a rise in Delta variant cases of coronavirus. US President Joe Biden announced new measures to curb the rising gun violence across the country.
These merchants of death are breaking the law for profit. They're selling guns that are killing innocent people. It's wrong, it's unacceptable.
In order to curb what he calls an epidemic of gun violence, Biden is aiming for a crackdown on the flow of guns. He adds that there will be zero tolerance for those who violate existing laws. The United Nations calls for a probe into the airstrike in Ethiopia's conflict-hit Tigray region, which killed at least 43 people. The Ethiopian military says that no civilians were hit in the latest airstrike. The strike took place after residents said new fighting had flared north of the regional capital Mekele. British-born tech mogul John McAfee died by suicide in a Barcelona prison after the Spanish High Court authorized his extradition to the US on tax evasion charges. His lawyer says that he had seen no sign before the pioneer's death that he would take his own life. Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi told the Vatican not to meddle in a parliamentary debate over a draft law designed to combat homophobia. The Vatican earlier protested over the bill, saying it could restrict the religious freedom of the Catholic Church. Draghi reiterated that Italy was a secular state. India and the US began a two-day multi-domain passage exercise involving an array of defense platforms through the Indian Ocean. The drill aims to strengthen bilateral relations and coordination in maritime operations in the backdrop of China's military expansion in the region. Cristiano Ronaldo has equaled the all-time record for the most goals in international men's football. The five-time World Player of the Year scored 2 penalties to help Portugal claim a 2-2 draw against France on Wednesday night and qualify for the Euro 2020 knockouts. Ronaldo now has 109 international goals, which equals the mark set by Iranian Ali Daei between 1993 and 2006. Two-time defending champion Andy Murray has been selected for Great Britain's tennis team at next month's Tokyo Games. The former world number 1 is the only man to win the singles gold at consecutive Olympics, but he is now ranked 119th in the world and has only won 1 ATP title in the last 4 years. Murray will play singles and will also team up with Joe Salisbury in the doubles.
Last year, when the pandemic began wreaking havoc across the world, China was busy covering its tracks. It constructed its own version of events, an alternative version of history, where the Chinese state bore no responsibility for its criminal negligence. 18 months on, a scientist has found clinching proof of China's cover-up. At the peak of the pandemic, when the world was struggling to understand this virus, Chinese researchers deleted more than 200 virus samples from a public database hosted by the United States. And this included samples from the early cases in Wuhan. So why did China delete these samples from Wuhan? What was China trying to hide? What did these samples contain? And why did America allow these Chinese scientists to delete them? We'll answer all these questions in the next 4 minutes. I'll start from the beginning. In March 2020, when the outbreak began in Wuhan, a study was published in China. And the study came with a spreadsheet. It had information about 241 genetic sequences collected by scientists at the Wuhan University. All this information was uploaded on an online database. It is called the Sequence Read Archive. It is managed by the US government's National Library of Medicine. And that's a wing of the National Institutes of Health, or NIH. So what is this archive? Well, think of it as a massive online database where scientists from all over the world can upload their findings about new viruses. So just like everyone else, some Chinese researchers also uploaded their research here. Reports say all of this happened in March 2020. But a few months later, in the month of June last year, the scientists behind this Wuhan research came online and filed a request. They wanted the database of 241 samples from Wuhan to be deleted. What was the reason? Apparently, the scientists wanted to submit all of these findings to another database, and this was confirmed by the NIH in a statement today. Now, here's something that you should know. Researchers who submit their data to this server own the rights to their research. So they can request the withdrawal or the deletion of the data that they have uploaded. And here was a scientist from China requesting that his or her data be deleted so that they can upload it again in another database. It sounded like a harmless request. It was granted. But then an American scientist began digging, probing into what was actually inside these Chinese research papers. What was this data? What did these samples say? Let me first tell you who the scientist is. His name is Dr. Jess Bloom. He's a biologist from Seattle, one of the 18 scientists who recently wrote a letter in the journal Science asking for a new investigation into the origins of the pandemic. Now, Dr. Bloom has been researching the Wuhan virus himself. Earlier this month, he tried to look for Chinese research on the American database, the same one that we spoke to you about. And he found that this Chinese research was deleted. So he began an investigation, and this is what he found. These Wuhan samples were collected by a Chinese scientist named I.C. Fu. This was at the Renmin Hospital in Wuhan. The same name also came up in another study online that described an experimental test for the Wuhan virus. And this is where things get interesting. Apparently, the research that was uploaded to the American database earlier had the samples of the Wuhan virus. These samples were collected through nasal swabs from early patients in Wuhan, and then these samples were removed. What does this tell you? Chinese researchers removed early records of the Wuhan virus. But here's the thing about the internet. Once you upload something on the World Wide Web, chances are it will stay there forever in some form or the other. It is very difficult to wipe it off completely. So through his research on the internet, Dr. Bloom managed to find 13 out of the 241 original samples that China had deleted. And he has now published a paper. It says Chinese researchers had published sequences from samples collected from Wuhan in January and February of 2020, and that the deletion of samples was suspicious. And I have some quotes from what he has said. Allow me to read from his paper. He says there is no plausible scientific reason for the deletion. There are no corrections to the paper. The paper states human subjects' approval was obtained. It therefore seems likely that sequences were deleted to obscure their existence, particularly in light of the directive that labs destroy early samples and multiple orders requiring approval of publications on COVID-19. Let me explain what he's saying. Chinese officials, remember, had allegedly ordered the destruction of early samples. Beijing was tightly monitoring all the research that came out of China. And that's perhaps the only reason why the samples from Wuhan were taken down. These revelations don't tell us anything about the origins of the virus. They do not settle the debate on whether the virus was natural or man-made, but they reconfirm China's culpability. China went out of its way to scrub all evidence. What explains this effort to hide all samples and destroy all research? China lied, and people died. That's what it tells you. Now, there's a lot of talk, a lot of tough talk on countering China, a lot of promises, a lot of probes. But how serious is America about putting a leash on the dragon, on controlling its belligerence and expansionism? I say this because ever since Joe Biden has come to power in the US, he has mentioned China so often that it seems America has no other goal at the moment but to save the world from China. So questions are bound to arise. Is this preoccupation, this obsession, actually leading to something? Is Joe Biden really walking the talk? And is his administration willing to go the whole hog to counter China? Our next report explores.
After reviving the Quad, aligning G7 allies against China, and pushing NATO for a transatlantic agenda, America has now opened several new fronts in its dispute with China. America's new #1 adversary. The Pentagon has launched several new and classified programs. No details have been given besides the fact that these programs will address economic, trade and security concerns. On the security front, reports suggest that the Pentagon is considering a permanent naval task force in the Pacific. This plan also involves creating a named military operation to allocate money and resources to the region. The Pentagon is also eyeing new weapons that are better suited for operations in the Pacific. Does this mean the US is preparing for a war with China? No, says the chairman of America's Joint Chiefs of Staff. In his testimony to the US House Committee, General Mark Milley has said the plan is to just deter conflict and sustain the power competition. On the trade front, America has imposed new sanctions over human rights abuses in Xinjiang. The US Department of Commerce has restricted exports to several Chinese companies that it says were implicated in gross human rights violations. This includes large producers of polysilicon for the solar panel industry. Not only is America imposing these sanctions, it also wants the world to stop benefiting from forced labor in Xinjiang.
When it comes to Xinjiang, when it comes to genocide, human rights abuses, I think what's incumbent upon all of us to do whatever we can to make sure that products that may be the result of forced labor are not coming into our countries, and similarly that we're not exporting to any country, China or otherwise, technologies or products that can be used to repress people.
And on the economic front, the US Senate has passed a major bill aimed at countering China's technological ambitions. It's called the US Innovation and Competition Act, a bipartisan legislation aimed at investing $250 billion in scientific research and technological innovation. This bill will push partnerships with private firms and research universities across the world and address challenges in tech spaces where America is lagging behind China in production and market space. Trade, security, and economy. America is indeed trying to walk the talk in countering Chinese dominance. But so far, its efforts seem to be aimed at safeguarding American interests only. If it really wants to re-establish itself as a leader of the global economy, the Biden administration will have to do more than putting America first. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The decisions made in Washington do have a bearing on the entire world. Look at what's happening in Afghanistan. American troops began leaving in the month of May. The Taliban stepped up its offensive. It controls more than 100 districts now. It is making gains every day. Now, America says it will slow down its withdrawal, but the damage is done. Afghanistan's power equations are changing, and India is responding to this changing reality. In the past couple of weeks, we've been reporting on how India has opened a channel of communication with the Taliban. Well, the government has not officially confirmed this yet, but a senior official from the government of Qatar recently said that an Indian delegation made a quiet visit to Doha for talks. And tonight we have what looks like a second confirmation. It is in the form of a report that was published in a British newspaper called The Times. They've managed to get more details from the Taliban, and this is what the Taliban claim. They say India made the request for the meeting and the Taliban informed Pakistan before meeting with the Indian delegation. I have details of what it says. Allow me to quote from here, from what this so-called Taliban official told the reporter. The Indians have concerns and requested that the Taliban should not support militant elements who are anti-India. We have told the Indians that Pakistan is a very important country for the Afghans, and we will never forget it. We also have reservations about India's role in Afghanistan, as they have been supporting the Afghan government and providing them with arms and ammunition. What does this tell you? The Taliban is open to having a dialogue with India, and why wouldn't they? It gives them a lot of legitimacy. It also shows that Pakistan can cast a shadow over any engagement. Also, New Delhi's support to the democratic leadership in Kabul is a sticking point, and that is perhaps one area where India is unlikely to make any concessions. In recent statements, New Delhi has reaffirmed its commitment to democracy in Afghanistan. This week, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar told the United Nations Security Council that the gains of the last 2 decades must be protected and not reversed. So how will this shape India's engagement with the Taliban? Suhail Shaheen, the spokesman for Taliban's political office in Doha, issued a statement recently, and this is what he said. We are ready to speak with any country, including India. The war situation will be over soon, and we need reconstruction and development, which could not be achieved without cooperation from regional countries. The Taliban needs India for legitimacy, for its investment in development projects. Right now, India is supporting more than 500 community development projects in Afghanistan. They're spread across 34 provinces of the country. The future of these investments depends on assurances from the Taliban. But negotiations, we know, are a two-way street. There are clear differences between India and the Taliban right now. And Pakistan's overarching influence on the Taliban remains a matter of concern. So New Delhi's challenge will be to build its own leverage with the Taliban. This is, of course, a developing situation, and we'll be keeping track of this very closely in the coming weeks. For the moment, let's talk about what's happening in the Crimean waters. An old European powder keg is heating up. 2 Cold War adversaries, 1 volatile stretch of sea, and 2 contrasting versions of what unfolded. First, let me introduce the key players, Russia and Britain, 2 countries that live in forever suspicion of each other. On Wednesday, they were locked in a standoff. Why? Because a British warship sailed near Crimean waters. You can see it on this map here. This is sensitive territory for Russia. They annexed the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. It immediately backfired. Russia was booted from the G8 and Western sanctions followed. So for Russia, Crimea is sovereign territory. But for the West, it is an occupation. These competing claims clashed on Wednesday. Britain says it was innocent passage, a straight line route from Ukraine to Georgia. But for Russia, it was a blatant provocation. We have pieced together the events leading up to the Black Sea standoff. Right from the warship's arrival in Ukraine, take a look at this.
Their posture will likely be more belligerent because of our proximity to what they recognise as their waters.
So we're straight into the thick of it. We're going to action stations now, just to bring us up to a higher state of readiness.
So Russia claims it fired warning shots at the British ship. The UK denies this ever happened. Since the Cold War, Russia has never admitted to firing at a NATO ship. It's been nearly 3 decades. So why did Moscow feel the need to do so this time? Why did it feel threatened this time? A couple of reasons. Number one, this wasn't just any warship. It was HMS Defender, a Type 45 destroyer. The ship was loaded with a surface-to-air missile system, a helicopter weapons system, and multiple medium-caliber guns, enough for a big fireworks show. The Defender is part of the Carrier Strike Force, the same one that will soon reach the South China Sea. So from a Russian perspective, here was a hostile warship 9,000 kilometers from home. Reason number two, this standoff was years in the making. Russia is surrounded by NATO states. They now have an indulging US president. And to the southwest, Ukraine is clamoring to enter the NATO. President Vladimir Putin feels Europe is ganging up on him. His natural reaction was to act out, to see how far he can push the West. And this wouldn't be a first. Putin did the same in Georgia, in Crimea, and then recently in eastern Ukraine. Question is, has he gotten away with it? Within hours, Moscow summoned the British ambassador. They accused the warship of violating UN maritime laws. So how is London reacting? They're surprisingly docile, trying to downplay the episode. They say no warning shots were fired, and as for the Russian jets tailing them, it is apparently common practice. Listen to this.
I don't think there were warning shots. There was a gunnery exercise that was taking place, and it's not uncommon for the Russians to do this in this area, and therefore the incident's not particularly abnormal in that sense.
Not abnormal, he says. Animosity to Russia, though, is a Churchillian trait. Every British government inherits it. And in recent years, bilateral ties have collapsed. In 2018, Russia was implicated in the Salisbury poisoning. They've also been accused of multiple cyber attacks on Britain. So why is London suddenly giving Moscow a pass? Could be a case of choosing its battles. Britain's new frontier is not the Black Sea. It is further east. The Carrier Strike Force intends to sail through the South China Sea. But this double standard could come back to haunt Britain. How can they challenge China's illegal claims after ignoring Russia's? For the moment, at least, it's a moral victory for Moscow. They've dropped bombs around a British warship, and London's reaction was, don't overreact. Vladimir Putin has displayed his appetite for conflict. It's a waiting game to see if Europe is ready. And Europe's troubles don't end with this. The European Union is divided on the issue of LGBTQ rights. It's a story playing out on many fronts. Hungary, for one, is pushing a law that allegedly discriminates against LGBTQ people. The Vatican is pushing Italy to drop a new law on gay rights. And football, too, has become embroiled in this debate. Our next report tells you more.
The European Union is under pressure. Ahead of a major summit in Brussels, 17 member states have written a letter calling on the bloc to fight discrimination against the LGBTQ community. In the line of fire is Hungary. It has passed a controversial law. It has banned gay people from appearing in school educational materials and TV shows for children under 18 years of age. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, issued a swift condemnation. She threatened to sue Hungary over human rights violations.
The Hungarian bill is a shame. And I've instructed my responsible commissioners to write a letter to the Hungarian authorities concerning or expressing our legal concerns before the bill enters into force.
But Hungary is just the beginning of the European Union's challenges. Recently, UEFA, the governing body of European football, faced a backlash. It had rejected Germany's plans to display rainbow colours at the football stadium that was to host a match between Germany and Hungary. Germany responded with a series of protests. German stadiums defied UEFA's instructions. They lit up in rainbow colours. German companies changed their logos on social media to support the community. During the game itself on Wednesday, a protester barged onto the football field with a rainbow flag. While the German protest was on, another controversy erupted in Italy. The Italian parliament is debating a new law. A bill that will list violence against the LGBTQ people as a hate crime. If passed, the proposed law will offer legal protection from violence and discrimination. The Vatican wants Italy to drop the bill. It says such a bill will interfere with the freedom of speech. But many argue that the Vatican feels threatened by the proposed law. Same-sex marriages still don't enjoy the blessings of the Church. And Italy's law could lead to a cultural clash with the Vatican. Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi stepped up to defend the bill in Parliament. He asked the Vatican not to interfere with Italy's internal affairs.
Our legal system contains all guarantees to ensure that laws always respect constitutional principles and international commitments, including the Concordat with the Church. There are preventive constitutional checks in the relevant parliamentary committee. It is again Parliament that first discusses constitutionality, and then there are subsequent checks in the Constitutional Court. Finally, I would like to point out one thing, which is found in a 1989 Constitutional Court ruling. Secularism is not the state's indifference to the religious phenomenon. Secularism is the protection of pluralism and cultural diversity.
The debate on LGBTQ rights has split Europe. Member states and major institutions are taking opposite sides. The European Union has decided to protect the rights of the community. But the bloc faces serious challenges within. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Now let's talk about a 5-letter word that has baffled and infuriated us from time to time. A term that is perceived to be a religious order, but in reality is just an opinion, and often a bizarre one at that. The word I'm talking about is fatwa. The latest one has come from Bangladesh, from a Bangladeshi cleric rather. The man on your screen, his name is Mufti Ahmadullah, a prominent Islamic cleric who appears on TV shows quite frequently and is quite internet savvy. He has more than 3 million followers on Facebook and YouTube, but don't go by his popularity because Mufti Ahmadullah may have issued the most unpopular fatwa ever. He wants Muslims to stop using a Facebook emoji, this one, the haha emoji. Well, that's how one would react when they listen to the Mufti's explanation. In a short clip posted on Facebook, Ahmadullah said the emoji is often used to mock people, to ridicule them for their posts and pictures on social media, and hence totally forbidden in Islam. Listen to this.
যদি রসিকতা করে মজা করে আমরা এরকম কোনো রিয়্যাক্ট করে থাকি, যার সঙ্গে করছি, যার পোস্টে মন্তব্যে হাহা রিয়্যাক্ট দিয়েছি জাস্ট আনন্দের জন্য, মজা করবার জন্য, তিনি নিজেও এটা নিয়ে মজা করেছেন, এটাকে মজার ছলে নিয়েছেন, তাহলে সেটি তো ভিন্ন বিষয়। কিন্তু যদি তাকে তাচ্ছিল্য করবার জন্য বিদ্রুপাত্মকভাবে এটি করি, তাহলে এটি হারাম, সম্পূর্ণ নাজায়েজ একটি কাজ।
Haha is haram, he says. You think that fatwa is too much? Then wait till you hear about the response. The video we just showed you has received more than 90,000 likes and hearts, more than 3,000 comments, most of them positive, and more than 500,000 views. But the response on Twitter is completely different. Hundreds of users are in splits. They're pointing out how ridiculous this fatwa is and mocking the logic behind it with the very same emoji. Now, both sides are entitled to their opinions, and while we are debating a fatwa, we may as well ask this. Are fatwas even relevant in today's world? Are Muslims bound to follow them? They pop up in the news every now and then, and most of us mistake it for a decree, a religious order akin to a court ruling. Well, the fact is, a fatwa is just an opinion, a piece of advice on matters pertaining to Islamic laws, practice and convention. So any Muslim can ask for a fatwa, any Islamic scholar can issue a fatwa, but it's not a legal or moral obligation. It doesn't have to be obeyed. That said, how did fatwas get such a bad name? Well, it helps to look at history to understand. The word fatwa became controversial after 1989. That's when Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa to kill novelist Salman Rushdie for his satanic verses. The supreme leader claimed that Rushdie's novel insulted the Prophet and that he deserved to die. And since then, fatwa became thought of as a synonym for a death warrant, a symbol of a dark and regressive stereotype of the Islamic world. And much credit for this stereotype goes to Islamic clerics themselves. Over the years, we've seen some astonishing fatwas for some of the most illogical reasons. Well, here are the weirdest of the lot. In 2005, a fatwa was issued against tennis star Sania Mirza, warning her to wear proper clothes or she'd be stopped from playing the game. The Islamic body behind this fatwa said the player was corrupting the minds of youngsters and that her clothes left very little for imagination. Whose imagination, you would ask? Perhaps their own. Then in 2008, Malaysia's top Islamic council issued a fatwa against tomboys. The body said that teenage girls who dress like men should be punished, calling their lifestyle against the order of nature. Would you believe that there's a fatwa against Mickey Mouse too? In 2018, a Saudi cleric called the Disney icon a soldier of Satan, a repulsive, corrupting creature that deserved to die. Too bad the cleric forgot the laws of nature do not apply to cartoons, not yet at least. And in 2014, a religious watchdog in the UAE issued a fatwa against living on Mars, the planet. The body warned Muslims against opting for any future Mars missions, saying that Islam does not permit traveling to the red planet. And look at the irony. Today, the UAE has become the first Arab country to send a rover to Mars, the Hope Orbiter, that's what they call it. It is searching for signs of life. What does all of this tell you? That fatwas can be as irrelevant today as those issuing them. In Nicaragua, filing a nomination in the presidential election can put you in jail. 5 hopefuls dared to contest against President Daniel Ortega. They've all been detained, along with 10 other opposition leaders. The world is now calling Ortega a dictator and demanding action against him. Here's a report.
Another day, another raid in Nicaragua. This is the home of Cristiana Chamorro. She is one of the 15 opposition leaders of Nicaragua who have been detained on the orders of this man, Daniel Ortega, the president of Nicaragua. Ortega has ruled over his country for 14 years. Now he wants another term. So he is silencing his critics. At least 5 presidential candidates have dared to challenge Ortega in the upcoming election. All 5 of them have been arrested. Not just presidential hopefuls, 10 opposition leaders too are also behind bars. They've all been charged for vague national security violations. Ortega's critics say the president wants to crush all competition. Voting will take place on the 7th of November. Sergio Ramirez, the former vice president of Nicaragua, says the upcoming election will have no credibility.
The regime is aborting the possibility of any kind of elections with minimal credibility, and it never wanted to face the reality of an election where power could have been put in dispute. It seems that the root of everything is there.
The crackdown has met with a protest. Angry Nicaraguans have taken to the streets. International condemnation has followed. The United States has slapped sanctions on Ortega's daughter and allies. At the United Nations, 59 countries have signed a joint statement to express concern.
I call on the government of Nicaragua to urgently change the course of action that is taking place in the face of the electoral process. This implies at a minimum immediately releasing all persons arbitrarily detained, seizing all acts of persecution against dissenting voices, restoring the rights and freedoms that make possible a free, credible and fair electoral process, and revoking restrictive legislation of the civic and democratic space.
Regional powers are trying to put pressure on Ortega. Mexico and Argentina have recalled their ambassadors. The United States has called on the international community to treat him as a dictator. But rights groups feel these measures won't help until Russia and China put pressure on Ortega.
Will be resistance from countries like Russia and China, among others, right? They won't be alone. But there will always be resistance. That shouldn't stop us from at least talking about issues. And one thing that I have learned in my decades of following the UN is just having an issue discussed at the Security Council, formally or informally, does a lot to get governments to think about, they start to get scared. They're worried that they're under the microscope. It's a very powerful tool.
Ortega rose to power in a democracy. Now as president, he is dismantling it. His desperate bid to stay in power has now earned him the tag of Nicaragua's second dictator. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
What's in a name? I'm asking this question for the second time this week because the answer to what's in a name is increasingly becoming quite a lot. Case in point, Japan. The country's top court has ruled that married couples should use the same surname. 3 couples were not allowed to register their marriage simply because they wanted to keep separate surnames. The women wanted to keep their maiden surname, the men their family surname, so they could not register their marriage. The couples went to court in the year 2018. In 3 years, this case has landed in Japan's apex court. 15 Supreme Court justices sat in judgment. 5 said prohibiting separate surnames is unconstitutional. The rest disagreed. They cited a 2015 judgment that said using the same surname was well established in society. Finally, the court said the issue of surname should be settled in the parliament. But here's what the ruling added. The court has in fact found no points that should be changed from the decision in 2015, even as it takes into account the changes in the society and awareness of people. Does this sound contradictory? Well, it should, because it is. The court acknowledges the changes in society, but it sees no point in changing an old decision. Why, if I may ask, are courts so resistant to change? Let's look at what the law in Japan says. Article 750 of the Civil Code states, and I'm quoting, "A husband and wife shall adopt the surname of the husband or wife in accordance with that which is decided at the time of marriage." So what is normally decided at the time of marriage? According to data from 2015, 96% of married women in Japan use the husband's name. What about other countries? In the United States, 70% of the women adopt their husband's family name. In the UK, the number is almost 90%. Most of Europe follows a similar pattern. Iceland is an exception, though, where women mostly keep their birth name, as is the case with Spain. In case a Spanish woman takes her husband's name, she uses a prefix "the" before his surname. Also an exception is Greece, where the law mandates a woman to retain her name for life. In Norway, a lot of women keep their maiden names as their middle name. What about India? It is all for choice, thankfully. There is no law mandating a woman to change her name upon marriage. She can keep her maiden name, she can adopt her husband's name, she can have both or none. Japan is reportedly forcing married couples to share a surname. Is it even real? Were a big deal simply because, apart from mirroring our social status, surnames were our identity. But today we have a social security number. Aadhaar in India, our iris scan is our identity, our fingerprint is our identity. This allows us to play with names, make babies. People have done it. We've come so far, and yet we're still fighting over full signatures, maiden name versus husband's surname. We say, let this be a choice. And come to think of it, the whole idea of a surname is a bit archaic. It has patriarchy written all over it. For a woman, you either have your father's name or your husband's. Back in the times, a woman was viewed as a man's possession. A woman had no legal identity. At birth, she was to take her father's identity, and after marriage, her husband's. But we have moved on, or so we'd like to believe. Today, there are people who drop their surnames altogether. Men live with their wife's surname, couples with different surnames, or names of both families. What does it tell you? That the only thing that's sacred today is choice, and our laws must reflect this change, unless they too want to risk redundancy. This morning we woke up to a bombshell testimony in America. It came from pop sensation Britney Spears. Since 2008, she has been living in a conservatorship, which means that her father controls her entire life. She has no choices of her own, neither personal nor professional. She's 39 years old. And this has been going on for 13 years. So after 13 years, Britney Spears has finally spoken out against this arrangement. She's called it abusive and enslaving. She's accused her father of reveling in her sorrow. It was a moving account. Celebrities and fans want this conservatorship to end. But what did the court make of it? Will the Free Britney campaign be a successful one? Here's a report.
Famous, yet hidden away. Powerful, yet chained. Breathing, but barely alive. That's been the life of Britney Spears since 2008. Seems like yesterday when she broke out on the scene. All of 17 years old when she dropped decade-defining hits. But growing up in the limelight can be unsettling. Soon, the stress began to show. First came an ugly and public divorce in 2007. Spears lost custody of her 2 children. She started acting out in public. A year later, she was hospitalized twice, on one occasion after refusing to surrender her son. This is when talk of a conservatorship first emerged. What exactly does it mean? A conservatorship is for people who cannot make their own decisions, mostly due to mental illnesses like dementia. In such cases, the court appoints a conservator. For Britney Spears, it was her father. Since 2008, he has controlled her life, where she performs, what medicine she takes, her $60 million empire, and even her reproductive choices. Did Britney approve of this? There were always murmurs of disapproval, but on Wednesday, all doubts were put to rest. Britney Spears spoke out in court, pleading to end the conservatorship. What she described was an abusive enslaving experience. "I'm not happy. I cry every day," she said. She wants to move on in life, raise a family, but she claims her conservators won't let her have children. They won't let her visit the doctor to remove her IUD contraception. Even her concerts and songs are beyond her control. If she doesn't get on stage, her managers could sue her. What about her father, her supposed guardian? This is what Britney had to say. "The control he had over someone as powerful as me, he loved the control to hurt his own daughter 100,000%. She complained of being drugged, threatened and exploited for money. How did her father react? He said he was sorry to see his daughter in pain. The testimony has mobilized public opinion. Outside the court, her fans raised placards and slogans. Celebrities rushed to join the Free Britney campaign. But what did the court make of it? The shackles aren't coming off soon. The law still sees Britney as incapable and dependent. And so her life continues under the eyes of a cabal of men, some of them in it for the money, others for pure sadism. But neither the court nor her guardians can explain this. If Britney is indeed unstable and ill, how is she still performing? Still churning out hits and raking in millions? They won't say. Britney's appeal was simple and moving. She wanted her life back, her freedom to visit friends, her freedom to start a family, her freedom to make choices. But once again, law and justice were too far apart. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
China is a master manipulator. It manipulates economic data, its currency, information on the Wuhan virus, the pandemic narrative, and now China is also manipulating emotions. We are in June 2021, and China has officially hit a dystopian low. Employees in China have two options: fake a smile all the time or go home. The country's Canon offices have been fitted with what's being called smile cameras. These cameras identify employees who have a smiling face. Only then are they allowed to enter the office building or meeting rooms. Canon says these cameras ensure that employees are 100% happy at work. But for a company as big as Canon, they could have really worked on a better alias for surveillance, something that at least does not challenge our common sense. Think about it. Which employee will be happy knowing her emotions too are being monitored now? Chinese firms already monitor programs that their staff use on their computers. CCTV cameras reportedly measure lunch breaks. There are mobile apps that track an employee's movement outside office. And now there are smile cameras monitoring their emotions, forcing them to look happy at all times. The thought of forcing a person to smile, rather fake a smile, reminds me of Xinjiang and the tailored videos that come out of its camps. It also reminds me of Tibet, its guided tours, and the rehearsed lines the hand-picked Tibetans say to international visitors. Both Xinjiang and Tibet have oppression and exploitation in common. China tries to hide this by painting fake pictures. Are the smile cameras and fake smiles serving the same purpose? Are employees being forced to smile to the cameras so that the world does not see their real emotions? While China may be the world's factory, the leading manufacturer, it is no longer a worker state. The Chinese Communist Party has dismantled that at a breakneck pace. Workers and employees are not living the best life. In 2010, Honda workers went on a strike for higher wages. Also in 2010, workers at Foxconn attempted suicide by jumping off the windows of their dorms. The suicide note details their long work days, minimal pay and harsh management. As recently as 2020, even African workers were upset over the exploitation by Chinese companies. They spoke about forced labor and torture. A research titled, "Why Are Chinese Workers So Unhappy?" found that China has the second lowest job satisfaction when compared to the world's 36 other prominent economies. Workers in China consider their jobs less interesting. Why? The study says vertical relations or the rigid top-down hierarchy may be one of the reasons. It talks about relatively poor advancement opportunities. It says only 1 in 5 workers report having a job that actually offers development perspective. And here's something very interesting. The study says employees in China value job security over an interesting job. It says, and I quote, "This importance that Chinese workers place on a well-paying job, which is higher than in most Western countries, generates a second driver of dissatisfaction." Moral of the story, there may be a reason why the workers in China are now being forced to smile, and that reason is not employee happiness. After reports of smile cameras emerged, a Canon spokesperson told Nikkei Asia, mostly people are just too shy to smile, but once they get used to smiles in the office, they just keep their smiles without the system, which created a positive and lively atmosphere. But here's what a Canon employee wrote on Weibo, Chinese social media. "So now the companies are not only manipulating our time, but also our emotions. Clearly, China will not be able to hide behind these fake smiles." We'll wrap up with that, leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.